Hello everybody and welcome back to another Doctor Who product review on The Host Productions. In today's review I'm going to be taking a look at the latest two releases as a part of the Silver Screen Records original television soundtrack series. This time round the 1980s Doctor Who serial The Visitation with music by Paddy Kingsland, and the 4th Doctor 1970s story The Sunmakers with music by Dudley Simpson. Both of these records are available to be purchased now from the Silver Screen website for £18.99, however are also available on CD for £8.99. There is also digital versions of both albums available on Spotify, and you can also download it directly from the Silver Screen website, also for £8.99. As per usual with this series of reviews, I'm going to start off by taking a look at both of the products and then move on to the actual music itself and try my best to describe the music as a part of these albums. As due to having two releases that are from two very different eras within the show's history, we have a rather stark presentation of the variety of Doctor Who soundtracks across the years. As per usual, both of these records feature brand new artwork created by Clayton Hickman especially for this release, and do of course nicely represent the story that the music is from. Of course, varying between the record and the CD version, if for example you really like classic series Doctor Who music, however do not have a record turntable. Due to this album also being available on CD, I would just like to point out that the media across both the record release and CD release are both exactly the same, so you can still enjoy this album if you do not have a record player. So starting off by taking a look at the Sunmakers album with music by Dudley Simpson, and the episode is written by Robert Holmes. Now, one of my personal favourite features of this series of records so far has been the unique artwork that has been created for this series, because comparing to the previous releases, we had a lovely artsy cover for that of the 5 Doctors, and we had a lovely silver design that was used with the 2nd Doctor story, The Invasion. And equally this time round we have an absolutely lovely piece of artwork nicely representing the Sunmakers as a story, however not particularly giving too much away. We have the Doctor nicely placed there in the very middle on top of the factory as seen throughout the story, with the ceiling of the factory along with these rather unusual and unique structures on the top of it. And of course in the very centre we have the emblem of the company, because all praise the company, within the sky. A really lovely colour balance has been used on this cover overall to give the impression of a sunset. Of course we have this rather rusty looking orange towards the top, and then this yellow and white glow emanating from the very middle, and overall it looks really lovely. Of course at the top we have original television soundtrack, the sticker that states that this is a Silver Screen Records release, as well as also stating that this is the 5th release as a part of the original soundtrack series, Doctor Who and BBC logo at the very bottom, and of course the Sunmakers boldly printed in a yellow typeface with music by Dudley Simpson stated at the bottom. Flipping around to the opposite side to take a look at the back of the record, once again a lovely red, orange and yellow design with the emblem in the very middle, and of course at the bottom we get the company information as well as the track list listed on the side. As per usual, this record does follow the same format with one LP. Side 1 does feature the music for parts 1 and 2, and the second side features the music for parts 3 and 4. Taking a look on the inside of the LP, of course this is only one record and the record itself is stored in this side. We are of course greeted by a lovely image of Tom Baker from the story in a rather unusual filter. Sadly however, Louise Jameson has been slightly cut off there by the Doctor's shoulder, with of course a few of the workers from the story at the opposite side, with a little bit of the factory in the background there as well. As per usual with this series, there is a lovely write-up on the inside giving context as to how the album came to be. In the case of these albums, the vast majority of classic series soundtracks are in fact kept by accident by people at the BBC back in the day, and if it wasn't for them accidentally keeping the music, we wouldn't be able to have these releases today. So the opposite side here we have a lovely write-up about Dudley Simpson. Sadly of course however, Dudley is no longer with us, therefore this write-up has been written by Mark Ayres back in April 2019, and we also get a little bit of a discussion about his career with a lovely image there at the side, as well as a general description of the soundtrack that you can come to expect on this record release, which is a nice bit of context for the record whilst you are listening to it. Following the style of the previous releases as a part of this series, the record itself is once again just pressed in a standard black vinyl with the emblem from the company there in the very middle. Dudley Simpson, without a doubt, is one of the most iconic Doctor Who composers in the entirety of the show's history. On the inside of the insert of the LP, I do believe it in fact states that Dudley composed over 270 individual classic Doctor Who serial parts, the 25-minute individual episodes between seasons 7 and 17, meaning that in the grand scale of things, Dudley Simpson composed a lot of Doctor Who, and in fact the Sunmakers is one of his last contributions to Doctor Who as a whole. So for all of the soundtracks to kind of be kept within the collection, it's nice to have an episode that is at the very end within his era, when he was also working alongside other shows, the likes of Blake 7, I do believe, around this time as well. However, as the sleeve does also suggest, it's not one of those most iconic Doctor Who stories. It's not Pyramids of Mars, Genesis of the Daleks or anything like that. It's simply a score that is, the only way I can describe it is traditional Dudley Simpson. When I think of classic series Doctor Who in the 1970s, I think of music like this. Ambient scores that can be placed into scenes to give it quite a lot of atmosphere without even recognising it. I think that he is the key Doctor Who composer when it comes to a soundtrack, and the main purpose of a soundtrack, and something of which that is lost, I would dare say, within modern TV today, especially some of new series Doctor Who. There was that ongoing gag within the Russell T Davies era of the show, where I think it was series 2 and 3 had very overpowering music to the extent where you couldn't even hear the dialogue over the top of it within some scenes, and I think that Dudley Simpson's music is the exact opposite of that. It is there to create atmosphere, it is there to create impact, and it is there to add a personality to the story. However, whilst you are listening along, unless you are properly actually listening for the soundtrack, you don't recognise it. It goes unnoticed. It seeps into the background of the adventure. And in a way, yes, that is what a soundtrack is meant to be. It's meant to have a record like this, where you can listen to the music by itself and experience it for what it is. Much like the vast majority of Dudley Simpson's soundtracks for Doctor Who, there is a very small-scale orchestra throughout this piece, probably due to BBC budget cuts back in the day. However, that doesn't mean the music feels empty or anything like that. I think he does a very good job with the rather small amount of instruments that he has to deal with, because compared to the likes of Murray Gould and Segan Akinola, he has only a fraction of the instruments and technology that they would have within modern TV today. So throughout this soundtrack we have horns, we have clarinets, we have an organ in there as well, and we also have a varied amount of percussion instruments. However, it is still on a rather small scale, and it creates a nice rhythm overall. I think there is a few nice little riffs throughout this piece. There's a few little soundtracks that kind of bridge between certain scenes, or at least you could imagine the Doctor and Leela will be in one scene, and then you would see them walking off into the distance, probably along a corridor, knowing the Sunmakers, and then throughout that you would have the music coming in to bridge between those two different events throughout the story. Music like that are getting a little bit of attention, and then equally you have some of the other scores in there as well that are simply there to go into the background and create an ambience, and I think that is rather well captured throughout this soundtrack overall. And of course, something that applies to both this soundtrack as well as the Visitation and some of the other soundtracks throughout this series, you have your usual format in there, where you have some of those smaller scale pieces that are for the ambient sections of the story, but you also have some of the build-ups in there as well, the stuff that is meant to build the tension and emotion within the story, and of course inevitably usually lead up to that cliffhanger at the very end of the episode, which again has been captured throughout this album, and it is great to be able to experience this music without the episode over the top of it and inevitably distracting you from the music itself. It is also worth noting that this album is probably one of the shortest albums with the collection so far. I do believe the media overall is around half an hour long, which, considering that this is available on record for around £18, yes, some people may consider that quite steep. However, I think this series is for the collectors, and if you are a collector of Doctor Who music, I don't think you'll think twice about paying £18 for a slice of Doctor Who history and a slice of Doctor Who music from one of the most iconic Doctor Who composers of all time. So yes, it won't be for everybody, but I thought it was just worth mentioning that that is something that is worth bearing in mind if you are thinking about purchasing this album, that there is only roughly around 30 to 40 minutes across the Visitation as well as the Sunmakers. So now turning to the second soundtrack of this review, it is the Fifth Doctor story, The Visitation, from the 1980s, and Doctor Who Season 19. Now this cover art has once again been created by Clayton Hickman, and is a little bit more action-packed compared to that of the Sunmakers. Of course, The Visitation is a sci-fi mixed period piece, and I think that the cover art does a very good job of representing that. As per usual, at the top we get original television soundtrack, the silver screen record sticker. This is the 6th release out of 8 as a part of this series. The Doctor Who and BBC logo, The Visitation in bold, with music by Paddy Kingsland and the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, who were of course the main creators of the Doctor Who music back in the 1980s. Turning to the actual cover art itself, the main central piece is of course the android dressed as the Grim Reaper, looking rather menacing indeed, with a scythe coming around the side, and of course this rather ominous looking glowing mask. In the very middle we also get Richard Mace with his rather long glowing hair indeed. It's a little bit like my own, to be honest. And then we have of course the Fifth Doctor on profile towards the opposite side as well, along with a pterolepto. Of course the entirety of the background is taken up by the Great Fire of London, with a little bit of a silhouette of the London skyline in there, and of course a firework thrown in for good measure as well. So overall a really lovely dramatic cover and a great representation of the story. Flipping around to the back, we get exactly the same stuff that you would come to expect on the vast majority of Doctor Who releases. We get another image of the Grim Reaper android, in case one wasn't enough. We also get a little bit of company information at the bottom and top, as well as of course side 1 and side 2, representing parts 1 to 4, and giving the individual listings for each track on this album, as well as the various time codes, which admittedly, putting time codes on a record I don't think is particularly helpful, at least in my own experience. It's probably more useful for those of you that have the CD version of this release. Turning around to the inside of the LP, as per usual, this is only one LP, which is in this side, and we are once again greeted by a lovely image of the Fifth Doctor, and of course his rather large TARDIS team, and a good look at the TARDIS exterior there from the opening half of The Visitation in the rather woody looking landscape. And then of course at the opposite side we get another write-up relating to the story itself, stating that this episode was written by Eric Saywood. However, this time round Paddy Kingsland is still with us happily. Therefore we have a write-up in his own words discussing looking back at the Visitation soundtrack all these years later, as well as talking about his career and the various different synthesizers that were used when creating this soundtrack back in the 1980s. Briefly taking a look at the opposite side as well, something to note, and something of which that has been present on all of the other releases as a part of this series. On the spine we do also get the slight suggestion of the TARDIS exterior, because once the series is complete of all 8 LPs, the spines of each record will collect up to feature the silhouette of the 60s TARDIS, which is a lovely touch. As stated when taking a look at the Sunmakers album, the record for this release is once again a standard black pressing. I think that in a rather similar way to that of Dudley Simpson, when you think of the 1980s of Doctor Who and its music compositions, you instantly think of a certain rhythm and you instantly think of synthesizers, and I think that is what The Visitation nicely embraces. It embraces Doctor Who in the 1980s because there is no other era throughout the show that creates music quite like what we see within this album and the other compositions of Paddy Kingsland. Of course, the 1980s is the era of the synthesizer, and therefore the vast majority of this soundtrack is using the synthesizer, something of which that we definitely didn't see within the Dudley Simpson era of the show. So this time round we have a soundtrack that is much more attention grabbing. It's definitely one of those soundtracks that sticks in your head a little bit more than the likes of Dudley Simpson, because Dudley Simpson's music does seem to always slip into the background. It can be rather ambient at times. However, the Visitation soundtrack in particular has the capability to be up to notch, and it can take over quite large chunks of the story. Of course, in particular for this episode, we have that lovely twist between sci-fi and historical period. Therefore, we have this rather unusual twist with Doctor Who music, where you have a rather period style of music and rhythm. However, it is played on an instrument that back in the day of the 1980s would be considered considered the peak of technology. Of course, looking back now, the 1980s era of Doctor Who music is either something that you like or dislike. I think it has created a staple within that era of Doctor Who, because as I say, when you think of the 80s of Doctor Who, you think of that synthesizer music, you think of that music that has a rather lovely fairy tale twinkle to it. Of course, throughout this album as well, there is a few references to the Doctor's theme, sort of slowed down renditions of the da-da-da, the middle eight pretty much, and likewise throughout this we also have other music that is rather twinkly and sparkly. I don't know if I can kind of describe music as having a personality, however this music kind of does. It has a character, because you imagine certain tracks throughout this music being played whilst say a certain character is confused or having an argument or something like that, which is something that you don't really have with the other composers in the early half of the show, the likes once again of Dudley Simpson, where the music seems to fit all different settings. You either have ambient or dramatic, there's kind of no in between, whether with soundtracks the likes of this you kind of have lots of variety, playing to lots of different types of scenes and lots of different types of moods. So once again, if you are a fan of the 1980s era of the show, this soundtrack is basically a lovely isolated piece to be able to experience that music without all the yabbering of the companions over the top, and of course Tegan constantly wanting to get back to Heathrow Airport. It's nice to be able to experience this music by itself without the drama over the top. So with that, that brings to a close another Doctor Who review on the Host Productions. I hope you have enjoyed it. The main thing that I try to convey throughout these reviews is that these products will not be for everybody. They are definitely for a niche audience of Doctor Who fan that like to listen to Doctor Who soundtracks throughout the years. And I think that if this collection has proven anything so far, it is the variety of Doctor Who music from the 60s, 70s and 80s, and especially when you then go beyond that and compare it to the soundtracks of new series Doctor Who, with compositions by Murray Gold and Segan Akinola. And if you have been interested by what I say throughout this review, however perhaps can't afford the LPs that I've showcased throughout this video, then there is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, a number of different formats that are also available that are cheaper, including digital downloads. It's also available to stream on Spotify, and you can also get the CD for both of these albums as well as the other albums as a part of this series for around £8. Those are available from the Silver Screen website directly, as well as Amazon and no doubt a number of other different retailers that stock Doctor Who merchandise. But that is it for this review. As I say, I hope you have enjoyed it. And do of course stay tuned on the Host Productions for brand new Doctor Who content each and every week. And until then, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.